Hello and welcome to the Infinity Stone podcast. As always, I am your host, Matt. With me is Andy, and we're doing something different right now. We're embarking upon a discussion about the X-Men movies. Perhaps the ones to begin the modern superhero movie? What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, we'll get into that real quick, but just people wondering, obviously, there are not going to be any MCU movies until like March. So, we decided we still wanted to record ourselves talking about movies. So, yeah, we decided we will do this. It's kind of like the prototype, what kind of started this ball rolling and maybe what motivated Marvel to, say, hey, let's start making our own because everybody else is doing stuff. Because yes, it should be noted that none of these were made by Marvel.
Right.
Marvel sold the rights to the X-Men to Fox. They had some input. There's their own little Kevin Feige guy, Axel Alonso, was talking about it. And you can see some of that influence that like clearly like Marvel was talking, but they weren't making the same. They were trusting Fox to make some movies. And we will spend the next however long looking at a bunch of movies and help decide how good a job were they doing with Marvel's property.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as did this kick off the modern superhero movie era? So post the Superman movies, post Batman, which pretty much was kind of it before X-Men in terms of
Yeah.
superhero movies, other than like a few knockoffs here or there, like I don't know, like a Dick Tracy or something. This is what started, and people now might be like, no, Blade came out first. Blade came out first, and yes, Blade came out in 1998. X-Men came out in 2000. Blade is not a superhero movie. Blade is not a comic book movie. I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people who went to go see Blade, which was a pretty good amount, it was a good success, had no idea that it was based on a comic book. It was not marketed as though it was based on a comic book. It wasn't the idea of we are going to make comic book movies and we're going to pick this obscure character from the 70s. They wanted to make a vampire horror movie action flick vehicle for Wesley Snipes. That's what it was. And they're like, oh, well, this property exists. And that's what it was. So I don't buy the idea that Blade, inspired a bunch of theaters to be like, oh, now we're going to make superhero movies. Just because it is a comic book movie that preceded X-Men. This is the one that started it.
No, yeah, I what this is it's really it's one of the first times you see a property other than Batman or Superman that people know from the comics being brought to the movies. It's not that other comic movies were not. There was a Punisher movie from the 80s. I think there was a Supergirl movie in the 80s that's really bad. There's, of course, the infamous Fantastic Four movie that never actually was aired anywhere.
Platformed, period. Yeah, not only did it not reach the theaters like Punisher
Right.
and Captain America, it was not released on home video. People
Right.
who have seen it was basically it made the bootleg rounds.
Right. There's the David Hasselhoff Nick Fury movie.
TV
There,
movie, yeah.
but my point is like there are some other comic book entities that were filmed, but besides Superman and Batman, nobody knew that they were comic book characters before they came to film. X-Men and then Spider-Man are a little different, where people who are not as familiar with them still kind of know about them. And with X-Men and actually also Spider-Man, they're building off of a familiarity that also arises from the fact that they had popular animated cartoons in the early 90s. And so when they're coming around about 8 to 10 years later, there's a class of people that watch them when they're kids that are now old enough to go to the movies on their own and appreciate the movies. So there's that step too to X-Men that I think kind of builds that crowd as well.
Yeah, and the cartoon was big because that was really the first time that X-Men crossed over from a comic book property to something else to reach a larger audience. Like there's a video game. Maybe
I know that video game.
Yeah, there's a version for iPad that my kids sometimes play, but it's infinite respawn, so they're just always hammering the special moves. And it's like, you got to conserve those. You have to play with 3 other people and be like, all right, now I'm going to hit Colossus' special move. But yeah, the cartoon did help build an audience enough for somebody like Fox to be like, yeah, we can do this. But and that's where it's different with X-Men though, because so there was the cartoon, but it still isn't the same cultural identification that Superman and Batman have. Like Superman and Batman are presence within the overall pop culture of America, So those aren't like, hey, we're really gonna make comic book movies. We're gonna make a movie of two of the most recognizable characters of literature. But this is really like, okay, let's really see, and let's put some real money, still lower budgeted, and we're talking about that. But let's put some real money and see if these nerdlings will be enough. If people will accept this idea of superheroism that isn't household names. There is the cartoon, so it's a bit more, but it's not like cartoons are like much bigger, they're bigger than comic books, although 90s X-Men is like the biggest that comics had ever been, but it's still like a small pool. So this is really that deciding we're gonna do it, and because of the success of this movie, a bunch of other studios decide, okay, we're going to do it, including DC. Like, okay, yeah, we'll make Batman movies again, that sort of thing. After deciding we shouldn't make Batman movies anymore. Like, this is it. Like, Blade is just like a low budget B movie, and it's just like they're probably like looking for a script for Wesley Snipes. And I'm not even putting down Blade. I'm just saying it's disingenuous to suggest that movie, which is not a superhero movie, kicked off the superhero genre. That's like making Howard the Duck only successful, and that's basically the other way that sometimes superhero and comic book properties get in there. We're not going to talk about how they're superhero or comic book properties. This isn't that. This is a big thing, and it was successful. So I fully think that the X-Men series kicked off what then would progressed to become like the biggest, and sometimes it feels like the only ball game in town. It started in these humble origins that we're going to examine tonight. We're going to examine the movie that came out in 2000, and then throughout the series that we're doing now, we're going to kind of talk about how this franchise both helped shape the superhero genre and kind of how it may be wanting and why it was necessary for, say, Marvel to take control. Really quickly, when we started this podcast, if anybody remembers, our goal was to be not too insider, not too comic book fan. We wanted, because these movies aren't just for comic book fans. They are the biggest movies in the world. So we wanted to view them as that. If you are fans of these movies, this is for you. I do want to mention that when it comes to X-Men, I'm not a casual fan. I have been a fan of X-Men for most of my life, and I have thousands of comics to prove it. So that is that, but it's honestly not that hard to separate my comic book X-Men fandom from these movies. So I do believe, I hope that I will be able to view them as movies themselves and not be like, well, that wasn't like the way the comics did it.
Okay. Well, let's get into it. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk some X-Men.
What is this place?
Anonymity is a mutant's first defense against the world's hostility.
Hey, no power!
To the public, we're merely a school for gifted youngsters. Cyclops, Storm, and Jean were some of my first students. I protected them, taught them to control their powers, and in time, teach others to do the same. The students are mostly runaways, frightened, alone, some with gifts so extreme that they've become a danger to themselves and those around them. Like your friend Rogue, incapable of physical human contact, probably for the rest of her life. And yet here she is, with others her own age, learning, being accepted, not feared.
And we're back, and I guess the big question is, let's just talk generally. Andy, what did you think of the movie X-Men?
So, two opinions is obviously what I thought of it way back in 2000 when it came out. What do I think of it now? Which what I think of it now being more important. I was pleasantly surprised when it came out in 2000 because I did not have high expectations. There'd been talk about making X-Men movies for years within comics because that's what they would talk about. But I did not have a lot of faith in what a movie could be. We briefly talked about what Marvel was doing for movies. Nick Fury TV movies,
Right.
Punisher and Captain America never seen the light of day, or at least the very back of your video store
Right.
boxes. Daredevil being a guy in a black costume in a Hulk movie being painted green. So it's like I never had much faith that they could pull the X-Men off. I didn't have a lot of faith that they would respect the X-Men, because even when they movies they were spending a lot of money on for superheroes like Batman, clearly they were not respecting the character as most recently. So I honestly wasn't even that excited. And then, you start to see a few trailers. You start to see, it's like, oh, this could be it. And the interviews are saying the right thing. This is kind of the first era when they're really talking about, like respecting the source material and all of that. And then it came out, and there were things I really liked. And then, I've been watching it for many years, since 2000. There was a time, especially when the Marvel movies were coming out and stuff, where I was kind of like, it's all right and all that. But I got to say, when I watched this last week, I think a lot of it holds up. I mean, you have to forgive a lot of, trappings from the fact that this is a 19-year-old movie. And also from the fact that, as we talked about, this kicked a lot of things off, and it was a bit of a tentative dip in the pool. We are going to talk about these things. But the movie moves, right? Like, it's going to places. It's got a lot to do, and I feel like it doesn't drag that often. What did you think?
I agree with that. So first, I will agree. I don't think the movie drags that often. I remember when I first saw it, I was also pleasantly surprised. And I think I have not seen this one in a while. I've rewatched X-Men 2 more recently. And I think it has like a bit of reflective glow on this one, because I hadn't seen it in a while, that like X-Men 2 is, in my opinion, very good.
Yeah, it might be the best in the franchise. That'll be something we'll examine. There's basically two movies contending for that title. Yeah,
I agree with that. But and because of that, like there's some reflective glow on X-Men, because it's like very close in both, like story and characters and a lot of things to X-Men too. Coming back to it, it's not bad. It's a little hokier than I remember it. A little might be underselling it. The effects are much worse than I was expecting, though I don't know why I was expecting better when really this is 2000, and like effects are generally not that good unless you're like The Matrix or Star Wars, or like the Star Wars prequels, when you have like an in-house effects studio basically. So I don't really know why I was expecting better effects, but they're pretty bad. There are some choices the movie made that I actually think is really smart, considering how much of the line it's straddling between like, serious superhero movie and like goofy comic book movie, because it is on both sides of that line this entire movie. And there are choices it makes that I think are actually really smart, considering the fact that it has decided to straddle that line. I don't think straddling that line is smart, but once they did that, there are choices they made where it's like, yes, okay, if you're going to do that, this makes sense. And we'll get kind of into the choices I'm talking about there. Overall, though, like the movie's carried by like 3 performances, and like it wins a lot of goodwill from those. And it does move. Like, you're correct in that the movie moves. There was so many fewer characters in this movie than I remember there being, though. There are just not that many characters in this movie.
No, it ends up feeling a little thin for a team movie, but I think it works out, because even with as thin as it is, there are many characters that do not have a lot to do. But I will say that they at least get a few. They make sure to give a note, like a grace note here or there, to every member of the X-Men, at least. Not so much, Magneto's goons. I'd say there's never really a Sabretooth moment that really means much. Maybe, him and Storm or something, but at least they're that way. I think one of the reasons why I had a more positive reaction, and when I say positive, I'm like, if you're into these kind of movies, this movie is still pretty good. If you're not, if you're like kind of like the casual, I go see MCU movies because, they're the biggest movies everybody's talking about it. I'm not necessarily saying you got to watch the X-Men, right? But their recent output has been so, bad that like watching this felt kind of refreshing. It was kind of like, hey, you know what? Because my opinion of the Fox franchise has gotten so low because of their most recent output, that I was like, they were actually doing some good things to start.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because you talk about where the Fox franchise has come is kind of reflective. It's actually really interesting because so when it starts out, this movie especially is kind of like very tentatively dipping its toe into the whole superhero thing. It's very clearly a superhero movie, and they don't really make bones about that fact, but it does so in a very kind of self-conscious way. And now they're like very like we're a superhero movie, but they're doing so in like a very uninspired kind of way.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there is a level of effort, like good effort, that goes into this movie that is appreciated in a way that maybe Dark Phoenix does not have.
Yeah. I think overall, my opinion is that it holds up, but very much powered like in a nostalgic way. And like, this is the quaint earlier times type holding up. If you're like just going into this, blind, no, you hadn't seen it before, maybe you're not, like I said, huge into it, and you're not of a certain age, you'd probably be watching like, really? This? But for me, as looking back on a 19-year-old film and some of the perspective that we want to bring to this is how we got from here to there. I found myself enjoying it throughout, and like it's not that long. That is very helpful because and that's intentional. They did not have the budget to be putting another 5 minutes into this movie. So
I mean, it's still almost it's like an hour 45 minutes. Yeah, that's not that long.
No, I mean, think of what Marvel movies are now.
Well,
not just Endgame type ones. Like they generally always push 2 hours at this point.
Yeah.
Because they know the money is there, and they know the audience attention is there. This movie doesn't have that. And that's the one thing that really, makes it a little tough to judge. It's what factors into my opinion is we really got to like think about where the movie was when it came out. And as we talked about in our intro, huge doubt whether there'd be any audience for this, whether like this was a huge risk. And we talked about that like when Marvel decided to make Iron Man, but this is bigger than that. At least Iron Man, it's like we could probably do like 80. Like
right.
There's more of the risk is like we're putting up our own money. Can we even make a movie? That sort of thing. Whereas this is like this might fail in a major way. We don't actually know if there is a real audience for this. Even like the comic book fans who were out there buying it, a lot of them weren't actually taking it out of the cellophane and reading them. Whether this would be successful or not was a big question, and thus you have to forgive a bit the way that they're very tentative about things because it's it's reflective of frankly people's attitudes, probably the attitudes of a lot of the studio heads. Like really, superhero wings, a guy with eye beams and all of that. That's what we're gonna do.
So actually, that introduces something that I really want to talk about, which is how I said they make some smart choices considering where they want to place this. The X-Men they choose is very self-conscious because they don't want to explain, they don't want to go into too much depth about their powers. So almost everyone they choose is someone whose powers are either very visual, so you can just tell immediately what it is, or has a very easy explanation. Like Rogue is basically the most complicated one. And they explain that on screen about what her power is. They're like, oh, if she can take your power. And it's like one of like the few monologues about powers the entire time. Everyone else is like pretty self-explanatory. You have a psychic, you have a guy who shoots eye beams, you have someone who controls weather, you have someone who heals. And then on the bad side, you have someone who controls metal. You have a toad. I guess that's his power. Like, Beast would be a tough sell on this one, even if you could just do like, oh, he's a big blue, Beast type of guy who can hang upside down. But for your first movie, it's easier to do the heroes they chose.
Yeah, and like that speaks to what the elegance of the X-Men were in the first place is we're going to make superpowered characters and we're going to do away with origin story. That was basically Stan Lee's entire motivation for creating the X-Men alongside Jack Kirby is I'm tired of coming up with reasons why these characters come up with powers. There's only so many gamma bombs or strips of space or being bitten by spiders. It's like, what if they were just born with them? So like that was simple. And that's part of the reason why mutants have endured so well is that it gives you a freedom to just create a bunch of weird stuff without having to explain why. Why did
Right.
they get that way? They were born with it. And it's so utilitarian that like so many other companies try to come up with some kind of variant of it, including Marvel themselves when they wanted to stop emphasizing X-Men. They're like, a cloud of stuff that gives them powers. Yeah, and other places they just do like the aliens. Aliens have these things.
Right.
And then I think that's just right there. So you don't really have to worry about origin stories of how these powers come to be. Instead, you can focus on a singular origin story of this is a group of people who are born with amazing powers, and this is how the world feels
Treats
about
them.
them.
Yeah.
And that's brings me to something that this movie does and the franchise does. And that's actually in comparison to the MCU is this franchise is actually about something.
Yes.
The Marvel movies, because of the characters that they had to use, are basically about heroism, about being heroes, about saving the world from threats.
Yeah.
But there's no like greater underlying philosophy. X-Men movies isn't that, and that's actually true of the comics too. Why the comics have such a great hook is the comics have, and the movie has this thing of we are this underclass of people who are treated differently because of the way we are. And the
Right.
way we are is a thing that we have no control over. And that is a very appealing idea. That's what drew me to the comics. It's become a metaphor that the comics really like to lean into for race and for sexual identification, that sort of thing. It's a messy metaphor because Senator Kelly isn't wrong that it's a little scary that somebody can control metal like that. That's the problem with racism is it's based on no facts at all.
Right.
These mutants actually can kill you, sometimes even just by accident. But the movie is about that, and I feel like it introduces that idea fairly effectively.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think it absolutely does. And I think it does that because, it's, one of the first scenes is Magneto back in, the Holocaust. And so it kind of centers it. And it's almost, like, I don't think we know whether Magneto in this thing is Jewish or whether his parents are persecuted for being mutants or whether they're just randomly persecuted by Nazis because Nazis do that type of thing. But it doesn't really matter which one of those it is because all of those are equally valid and they kind of center then mutants in that same kind of context and in that same discussion. So then when you're talking, it's an easy shorthand for being like, this is the way persecution has manifested itself. And that then brings it to the modern day. So we go from World War II and it's like the history, the timeline of this is continuing, is evolving. We don't need a lot more explanation. It's all there for us.
Yeah, and I think that was just such probably a very attractive hook for the filmmakers. And I remember interviews from the time from Bryan Singer. It's like when they explained it that way, that's how he was able to get into the idea because he didn't know from X-Men when it was just like, hey, it's time for me to start making money after making a few lower budget movies that one of which was excellent. The other one I never actually saw. And I should say Bryan Singer, director of The Usual Suspects, Apt Pupil, probably a completely horrible human being. We're not going to get into that part because frankly we don't really need to praise him very much to talk about this movie. But it's just like the idea of persecution and these people are different, and then the idea that really people like to kick around is like Professor X is Malcolm Magneto is Malcolm X,
yes,
and Professor X is
Malcolm,
Martin Luther King. Terrible metaphor, but it's something that kicked around. I think that got to him. But it gave a storytelling hook, and one thing it really did that this movie has that took Marvel actually a long time to get to. Really understandable motivations for the villain and a really good villain.
Yes, yeah, because so let's talk about kind of the cast because we mentioned it earlier about how like one of the things that carries this movie is the fact that like the leads of this movie are very compelling. And one of the leads is very clearly Ian McKellen, who is playing Magneto here, and he is like one of the great comic book villains that we've seen on screen. I mean, to be fair, he's probably one of the great comic book villains in comic books as well. But because we're talking about movies, let's focus on that. And he's basically working like against himself in most of his scenes. Like the guy who's playing Toad and the guy who's playing Sabretooth aren't giving him a lot to work with.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
we're
it's
real-
like a stuntman and a professional wrestler, basically,
Yeah.
right?
That's it. That's it. So, he's just kind of monologuing, and then he gets Senator Kelly in there who like actually is an actor, but he doesn't say much. He just gets put in a machine and turned into goop.
Yeah, actually, this is who McKellen has to work with. A professional wrestler who never made it big. I don't never heard of the guy. Yeah, the guy who played Darth Maul. And
Yep.
a model in her very first movie role. Those are the thespians that Sir Ian McKellen gets to work with. And I don't have no problem. He can do it all. He's like LeBron James out there. Just give me anybody.
Right.
Because, yes, and this is the beauty of hiring British actors. For them, acting is a job, not necessarily a star-boosting ego thing. He's like, cool, give it to me, and I will eat up all the scenery. I will play it as big and as important as you need to, and he is great for it.
Right. I mean, and also like, so Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, who are like two of the leads in this movie, are both like, first of all, what modern movie would cast your two leads as two guys who are easily in their 60s at the time? Like, just think about that, first of all, because like those are the guys you're like hooking into. But
this
it's also
franchise itself wouldn't do it when they were trying to start over.
hell no. But then because they did that, it also, there is a benefit of casting actors of that age, which is they don't think they're gonna break out with a new movie. They're like, hey, I'm just working for my paychecks now. It's I want to make sure I still have money for retirement and all that. It's any.
And I just
roles
like
are
to
blessing.
work. I like the craft. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they both are just like, I mean, I think Patrick Stewart, I actually think, is not as good in this movie as he is in the later ones. I think like, he's a little too subdued here. But
and part of that is the role itself. It's
Yeah.
not really asking much for him other than a lot of monologuing. He has to carry a lot of the heavy weight of this is this world and this is all that, because they have
Right.
two POV characters that are introducing us to this weird world, both Wolverine and Rogue.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is an effective tactic, because it's two different perspectives, and because they're going with the school presentation and idea of the X-Men, which again is from the very beginning of the X-Men.
Right.
As we get farther along into this, I have some thoughts about the school thing. I think it works well in this movie, but yeah, it ends up being this is the guy monologuing for the audience. It's a lot of Xavier's role, and then he gets knocked out. The big thing about getting Patrick Stewart for this role is basically he was the universal choice from every comic book fan ever. Was if they're going to make an X-Men movie, they have to have Captain Picard as Xavier, because how many bald actors do we know?
Well, I mean, yeah, and that's the thing. And, no one's going to shave their head for the role. I mean, come on now.
So for a silly comic book movie, why would you do that?
I mean, also, he is by far the biggest star in this movie at the time. Like, they had made Star Trek movies.
Yeah.
Well,
I'd say him or Halle Berry.
That's what I was going to say. Halle Berry, who's coming off a couple ones, is about to win an Oscar right before this, and will be in the next James Bond right after this. So, yeah, no, she's probably actually the biggest star, but I feel like they must have cast her like right before she got famous, because they give her nothing to do in this movie.
No,
it's
that never
bad.
changes, by the way.
Yeah, I know. It's one of the big problems with the franchise. But so then you have like those two, and then of course the other main characters are already say the two POV characters, right?
Yeah,
Rogue and Wolverine.
And if we're getting into casting, that's where we got to get into Wolverine. Well, first off, not the first person cast for this role.
Nope.
Yeah, they did not. Oh my God, I can't think of his name right now. He's like one of two actors my son even knows. Who plays Wolverine?
You mean
Hugh Jackman?
Talking
Sorry,
about
that was
Hugh
very
Jackman.
embarrassing.
Yes. Okay.
So yes, originally they had cast the dude who was the villain for Mission Impossible 2. And I had his name, and now it's gone because apparently I can't even remember Hugh Jackman. And he got hurt.
You keep going.
He got hurt filming Mission Impossible 2, and because this movie had no budget or anything, they're not going to wait. Like, we got to film somebody else. So they hired Hugh Jackman about a week before filming started.
So are you talking about Doug Ray Scott or Brendan Gleeson?
Scott.
Yeah,
Doug Ray Scott was originally cast as Wolverine, who himself was not a big star. Basically, he's going to be the villain of a movie that's coming out. Hopefully, that'll be successful when we can come to that. Hugh Jackman, nobody has heard of. He is like a theater actor from Australia. And I remember like there was interviews that came out where like Patrick Stewart's are like, we do not have the star of this movie yet. What is going on? I mean, again, I'm Patrick Stewart. I'll show up and do my job.
Right.
So huge risk.
Yeah.
And Hugh Jackman is one of the very best casting in the history of superhero movies. He
Yep.
as Wolverine ends up being, despite his height, perfect.
Right. And I totally agree with you. And it's even funnier because just adding on to the story about you told about how he showed up late. One of the best stories I've ever heard about the making of this movie is Hugh Jackman shows up on set. And he's like, okay, I didn't really have time to read the script. I don't know much about my character. His code name is Wolverine. I'm going to like act like a wolf. Okay. And so he's going around and he's like in a scene and he's like acting like a wolf and they cut. And I think it's the director, but it might be someone else is like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, my character's Wolverine. Like I'm like a wolf. And they're like, it's a completely different animal, Hugh. Totally different animal. Not the same thing. Apparently, that's the first time he knew that. So
Yeah, because they don't have Wolverines in Australia. They have so many other deadly animals.
right.
Yeah, and it's also a note is he is not jacked like he will
No.
be in all
Basically,
of
the next movie. I mean,
Yeah, next movie, and then he actually just kept taking it to each level, as superhero movies will. You can see
Right.
the evolution of superhero bodies in like Hugh
Yeah.
Jackman. Now this one he would have been more built, but he had no time. I
Right.
think the last thing they film is his opening shirtless scene, so at least he has more muscle. In fact, it's interesting. My wife was like, he looks pretty good now. Why'd he have to get so jacked? But that's the way superheroes ended up being. But yeah, no, he is so great as Wolverine.
Yes.
And it really elevates this movie. That's what we're saying. Like why this movie ends up being pretty good and pretty watchable is that it's mostly, Hugh Jackman versus Ian McKellen. That's most of the performances. And that feels good. Now, for the franchise as a whole, that ends up becoming a problem.
It does.
That the franchise never really wants to be interested in anybody but Wolverine, and then we'll find stuff for McKellen and Stewart to do, and that's a problem because there are more characters, and he doesn't necessarily fit in all of that. And you could just start making Wolverine movies, which they do, and that doesn't even seem to help very much for a while. But here, it works really well. First off, Wolverine is the most popular character the X-Men have ever created. But secondly, because he is that POV character, that it makes sense that he would have a bigger role. He is our window into this.
Right.
And then the second window we get is Oscar winner, I believe, or was she just anonymous?
I think she won. I can check that. But yeah, Anna Paquin playing Rogue in like one of her very early roles. No, I think she's good in this role. The one I'd say a problem with it is that the movie kind of forgets about her halfway through, and then when she becomes relevant again, they're just like, it's not anything because of her. We don't have to use her in any way. So she's just like a tool from that point on. Now, one of the things I admire about the movies is that she has a arc through the first three movies that is actually like a consistent arc, and that continues as such. So that in the second movie, like she has character growth, and then the third movie she has like a journey that makes a lot of sense, and they use her a lot better. Like she's one of the non-Wolverine characters that actually get stories in these movies.
Yeah, I'd say like this movie only cares about 3.5 characters. She'd be the half, and
Right.
that when they care about her, like her role as a POV, that works. Having the double one because Wolverine is new to the X-Men world, but not new to being a mutant.
Correct.
Rogue is new to the idea of somebody experiencing these powers for the first time. So I think it is important to have both. I think her powers work really well thematically because it gets to the idea that having these fantastical powers just emerge might not be so fun, might not be so great.
Exactly.
And I think the movie does a good job, even in some subtle ways, of just examining how much that hurts. What would it be like to not be able to touch somebody? I think a really strong, subtle moment in a movie that's not really, famous for subtle moments is when she's, running away on the train and she sees, a mother cuddling her son. And that, you just get a quick feel of loss as Rogue realizes she will never get that level of human interaction. So I think that, for the thematic idea of mutants is a really good, powerful one, and why, the character was a good choice, because Rogue isn't traditionally one of, a first X-Men group, but I think she worked
Though
really
again, she was in the cartoon,
Yes.
and again, like the cartoon is the touchstone for a lot of people watching this movie.
well. Absolutely. I think you're going to answer the question about Anna Paquin's Oscar bona fides.
She had the Oscar. She's the second
you go.
youngest Oscar winner ever. She won it at 11.
There you go. She
So-
went for the piano. So yeah, those four actors, I believe, are the ones that are, basically the performances worth talking about.
Yeah.
And I think they're all pretty good. And as you say, when she is asked to do stuff at the intro of the movie, I think she does pretty well. Her accent is shaky. Frankly, I mean, that is actually fairly comics legitimate because if you ever grew up reading the comics or watched the cartoon, Chris Claremont would write the cheesiest accents in for her for anybody.
You mean anyone who's heard Gambit is like, oh yeah, that is a
That's
real
how it-
legit Cajun accent.
That's how it was written off in the comics, mon ami.
Right.
The Gambit says, oh yeah, and she's always like, sugar. Huh? So they were trying to do that, and frankly, I suppose if you didn't try to do it, comic book fans would be like, no, she should sound like a stereotypical idea of a Southerner back in the plantation days or something. But this is an English actress that was doing it. It might have been better just to let her struggle with an American accent, much less a regional dialect. So that part is a little weak, but I feel like her horror at the powers. When she is nearly killed and then nearly kills Wolverine. The panic she feels in authorization, all really good. And after that, she's just a plot device for Magneto's machine. I feel like those four are really good. And then the other actors, sorry, nobody's interested in you, even though, every superhero character is somebody's favorite. Thanks for doing that to mine, but that's okay.
Okay. Should we take a break and come back and talk about our favorite sequences?
Let's do it.
Okay.
A strictly diplomatic affair.
You owe me some money.
Come on, Stu, let's not do this.
No man takes a beating like that without a mark to show for it.
Come on, buddy, this isn't gonna be worth it.
I know what you are.
You lost your money. You keep this up, you lose something else.
Come on, buddy.
Get out of my bar, freak.
And we're back. So, okay, Andy, hit me up. What's your favorite sequence from this movie?
I briefly mentioned this back in the Avengers Endgame podcast of one of the great thrills of Endgame was when they finally gave that big moment of Avengers Assemble. It touched like a part of me awoke, like the young kid in me. Like, this is what it's like. X-Men was the first movie to do that, and it was with the introduction of Wolverine. When we first meet Cage Fight and Wolverine, and then especially when, he's attacked in the bar, and the claws come out, and he pops them, and he does, the two on the outside with the middle one. I'm watching that in the theater. At this point, like, I'm a college student, so I'm too cool for this stuff, maybe a little bit, and I'm like, ah! It was just so perfect an introduction to Wolverine, who, I should add, never my favorite character. I was never a big Wolverine fan, in part, probably because, when you're a huge fan of something, you don't want to be like, I like the most popular thing, especially when you're younger. Now that I'm older, I don't really care about that as much. In fact, sometimes I probably go the other way. It's like, I just like the most popular.
Right, you're like front runners.
That's right. But I just thought, that scene, he's fighting in the cage and you get the metal sound. You get the claws popping out, and then it extends to his first interaction with Rogue, and she's asking about it, whether it hurts when the claws come out every time, and with the cigar, I'm like, oh my god, it's Wolverine, and it was so effective when I first saw it, and I still love it to this day.
Yeah, so I agree. That is a really good scene. In fact, that's probably my favorite of like the action sequences, because the other ones are just a little too hokey, and they really don't have the effects to really support them. I think my favorite one, and I kind of struggled with this one because, it's been like a week since I watched, and like specific scenes have already kind of fled my mind. Just, I don't know. But I actually thought we were talking about some of the rogue stuff earlier that was effective, and I think the one that stood out to me was when she by accident stole Wolverine's powers and like almost killed him in the mansion. Like that was a really effective scene, and then like kind of like the fallout of that, where like Iceman is all, it's like, hey, they're gonna kick you out, and but he's saying it like kind of kindly. It was,
No, it's not Iceman. It's Mystique trying to mess with her to get her out of.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that part. Right,
Because otherwise, that'd be such a huge dick. It'd steal his powers or be impaled and die.
Yeah.
It's like now. I think it's effective, especially once you realize it's a villain tactic, and also like a teenager would believe that because she already feels so bad and embarrassed and all of that. And I think that works really well. I also thought the introduction to the school.
That was the other thing I was thinking of. Yeah, the introduction to the school where like they're walking through and then they see the kids like casually manifest powers. Though the only one I couldn't place is the one who teleports.
It's not teleporting. She walks through walls.
No, that wasn't Kitty. No. The one on the basketball court. Kitty Pryde, I know.
Yeah. So when you first watch it as a kid, it's like, oh, how they're going to cheap out with Nightcrawler? No, kid who teleports on the basketball court is a good introduction to what this franchise would do. Is rando background characters who just exhibit little powers that have no other meaning. Next, that'll introduce the legendary character next to a kid who blinks to change the television channels.
Yes, I mean, very important mutant power. I think I'd actually really like that one. Yeah.
Yeah, although, how often do we flip through channels anymore? It's like, oh, you had your heyday, and now it's all like, oh, can you blink to scroll through your Netflix queue? But yeah, like I think it's a really effective, introduction to this world. Now, a few rewatch things to be like, how long was he talking? He's going from like his office and he's still like in the stables by now. And that seemed like one sentence. Like that's like a lot of talking for like one little speech. Like, timing wise, it doesn't work. It also starts to make you think it's like, wait, so the guy with the healing factor is unconscious from being thrown into a car all the way from like, Alaska, from a flight to New York to, enough time for Rogue to get like situated in class. But it's best not to think about these things.
They probably knocked him out because they knew that he was violent and would react poorly. So they gave him a sedative or two.
I mean, it would have to be the most powerful sedative in creation because
they overestimated. They overestimated, right? They just pumped him full of like elephant tranquilizer, and they're like, maybe we gave him too much, So
yeah. So from a time thing, but movies are always playing with time. The trick is if it's working well enough, you won't think about how the progression of time just is not working and matching up with the speaking of. But yeah, in terms of like introducing a school of fantastical people, it's really strong, and that is a very solid concept of which empires have been built. Like, that's the fun of the early Harry Potter movies, to which there is like, oh my god, that really seems so cool, all this stuff in one place, and that's what they end up building on before Harry Potter was a really big thing. I don't know if the books were out by then.
Right. The first, at least one was, I think, two. But another thing that kind of dovetails into my earlier point about how this movie made really smart choices about choosing powers that are visual and easily explained. So like the ones in the background, the ones who get shorter time at the school, you have Iceman, you have Pyro. It's pretty easy to explain that one. One dude does ice, one dude does fire. That's it. You get Kitty Pryde in the background who walks through a door. You get a random mutant who can blink on a basketball court. Like these are the background ones that we see. It's really easy to explain these ones and to just use them as shorthand for showing what the what the world of a mutant is like, the variations you see, and just as you said, like how this is a magical kind of place.
Yeah, and I think, if you're just experiencing these characters for the first time, we gotta feel like, oh, that feels really interesting. And they got like, a place where they're training with their powers, and they got this big round room and a big, airplane. I guess They hadn't shown the airplane yet, but just different things. And it's like, okay, this is fun. I would want to know more about this world. And then if you're a fan, it's like, oh my God, we're getting to see the Xavier Mansion. How exciting.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's really effective from both of those perspectives. And yeah, just fun. It's which is important. It is a moment where it allows you to have some fun. Let's talk about the stuff that's not so good.
Okay, so let me go first. I'm gonna I might steal your thunder here. I don't know. They don't give enough time or stuff to do to the other X-Men. Cyclops, Storm, Jean Grey. First of all, not a big team, as we talked about. But even so, none of them have all that much to do. Cyclops is basically mute, and he has a very cool visual power, and he uses it once or twice. Storm they never give her a lot, and then what they do give her is just really not good. Jean Grey, they give a bit more. If Rogue is half of a character, Jean Grey is like a quarter at this point.
Yeah.
She is, of the characters that we have not talked about, of beyond the big four, she is the fifth in this movie. But that's because she's like the love interest for Wolverine.
Yeah.
Right?
And then they also use her to help introduce the whole metaphor of the mutants, because she's giving that speech to the Senate.
Right, because she's smart. That's why she's special. It's not just the psychic ability; she's also really smart, which is, how she's too good for a Cyclops, who nothing about. So, so that's my biggest flaw. Now, what's your biggest flaw?
So just in terms of a scene, because I agree, that is a flaw of the movie, and it will not get better. I actually feel like it gets worse as the franchise goes on. At least this one gives Storm a scene with Senator Kelly. I don't think it was an effective scene, but it's something. Or her trying to talk, when she talks to Wolverine. Cyclops gets a bit of a verbal showdown with Wolverine, which I thought he actually got a decent verbal jab. And, obviously nobody other than Cyclops fans are ever going to be on his side in that. It's where I admit Cyclops is my all-time favorite X-Men. He gets the touching scene with his father figure. So they're trying. I don't know if any of it lands unless you come into those scenes with some emotional attachment to those characters. As the franchise develops farther, they ain't even gonna give them that. Nope. But I think the worst scene in the film, or what I picked out, is when Magneto is using his machine on Senator Kelly.
Yeah, that's really bad. That is a really bad scene.
Obviously, you want to give them some forgiveness for the level of effects, both with the budget and the fact that almost 2 decades have passed. Well, 2 decades have passed since they filmed it and created it.
Yeah, that's true.
But even just the way it's filmed, this feels like Mystery Science, Theater 2000 type stuff. Where it's cutting back in a mostly blackened space, and they go to the guy, and he's like, ah, and they go to the other guy, ah, and it's just so cheesy and bad. And McKellen, when he's talking, is trying so hard, right? I mean, frankly, he's probably not trying that hard because he has talent, but he's giving it. Really trying to give the speech, and he's trying to be a little snarky and all that. But when it's the actual time to get down to make the machine work, it's so cheesy. And this kind of segues into the next part of we're gonna talk about what's good, what this movie did well and bad in terms of setting the tone for the entire franchise. This right here, the movie has, as we keep talking about, a troubled idea of how far they want to get into the superhero stuff.
Yeah.
And we see this multiple times with Wolverine. It's you call yourself Cyclops, Storm, who are you, Wheels? It's idea. Yeah. And frankly, that makes sense. That is the level of skepticism that most people would have in such a scenario in a world where none of this exists in your mind. And also, I think maybe the average moviegoer might. So it's like trying to hang a light shade on this stuff.
Right.
Or lampshade is probably
lampshade.
Yeah.
That's the American term, at least.
There you go.
I don't know. Maybe Canadians call it
light shade. We're in the
shade.
Commonwealth. It's totally a light shade. We use. And later, the sneering reaction to what they're wearing. Oh, you guys actually go outside in this? What would you expect? Yellow spandex? Ha ha! Get it, you fans? Yellow spandex like Wolverine would wear, but that would be so stupid for people to wear. And again, I'm somewhat forgiving. I understand that they didn't give them superhero costumes. I understand the worry. I'd say full leather isn't actually that much better, but you
Nope.
know, it was 2000. They are like, hey, the Matrix was a big deal. Let's try to look like that. So they have that kind of, you know, dipping the toe. We know this. This is ridiculous, and we're not going to do it all the way. We're not going to put them in colorful costumes, and we're just going to call her Jean Grey, which is the cartoon did as well, I think, because
Yeah.
the character itself had issues because she was Marvel Girl, and they don't want to call a grown woman a girl. She was Phoenix, but then it had a different connotation. But this movie is comic book as fuck.
I was gonna say it. I'm glad, I'm glad you brought it up and agree, because this is so comic book. The plot of this movie is like an issue of a comic book from the 70s.
No, this is better. I'm gonna drop this on you. It's gonna blow your mind. All right, so this is Magneto's. The villain of the movie's big plan is to use a machine that will change the gathered world leaders on the molecular level. That is straight out of Batman 67. That is what the Joker does to world leaders in the derided movie that this movie is probably has no association with. The Batman movies tried to move away from that. That's what, Joker shot people and they turned to dust. World leaders, and they vacuumed them up. That is what this is. They couldn't get campier than Magneto's ultimate plan, but because they shot this movie through blue and gray tilted lenses, and like his purple is a little darker. Oh, this is more serious. Like, this is as silly as it gets.
I know. No, I totally agree. It's so silly, like when you step back and try to explain it, you cannot explain this movie to someone who doesn't know comics and have it make any sense whatsoever. But yeah, it's kind of like there are things this movie does that is obviously to lure in people who are not comic book people, and we talked about that with the way they chose people who it's easy to explain their powers, easy to visualize. With the fact that the costumes are more serious or whatever. Like, it's a lot of this movie is almost like they're trying to ease people into the sillier stuff. And then I feel like
a shot of the Holocaust. Look how serious this is.
Exactly. But then by the end of the movie, it's just goofy. It's like, you said Mystery Science Theater 2000. That's what it felt like. It's just, it's the type of thing where I feel like this strategy could be done. And if you did this today, first of all, you'd have more faith in the comic audience. But if you chose to kind of like ease people in, then the next movie would be super comic booky. You would just go all the way. And it would be like, okay, now that we ease them in and they kind of know people. Honestly, like, the modern day version of this is like Guardians of the Galaxy, where people like don't know that. They kind of ease you in before they introduce the talking tree, the talking raccoon, and the tree. But then like in the subsequent movie, it's like everything's just taken for granted, and now there's a plant that lives and can talk to you and is one character's father. That's super comic booky, but I feel like there's more faith in the audience to kind of roll with the punches. But they get so silly here that, like, I don't know what they were scared of.
Yeah, like the big showdown matches between the X-Men and that. For one, they're so undercooked. Like the fights, like the Mystique Wolverine fight is pretty. It's solid. It's pretty.
Yeah,
good,
that's not bad. Yeah,
there's some camera tricks that are like so turn of the century. Like when she slows down for a kick or whatever. Yeah. And also it's like that's what you decided to blow the FX budget, and her changing shape from Wolverine to Mystique and back. That doesn't add power to her kick. Maybe you could have given Cyclops an extra blast, but like the stuff with Toad is just completely silly, and he takes down 2 X-Men with it. But it's like, hey, we got Darth Maul, let's give him something to do. Honestly, like the silliness of it, other than like that Magneto scene, actually made me enjoy some of this more. Because,
yeah.
Like, what?
No, I agree. Yeah.
One of my major complaints about this franchise as a whole is how embarrassed they often seem to feel about the material that they're doing. And I felt like this movie, to a pleasant surprise for me, is less embarrassed than I remembered. So there's the
I would
that I mentioned.
Totally agree.
But they're gonna still go for it, and yeah, their plot after all the grandiose notions of we have this Holocaust survivor and he's really trying to spread his people, and we've got Martin and Malcolm, all of that is still Batman 67. It's still like just a complete supervillain hogwash plan, and. So in that sense, it's like, well, it's kind of fun. And, I wish the effects were better and the fights were more developed. But, I still get to see, Cyclops blast something. I still get, like, having to team up with Wolverine, getting the visor, and Jean Grey using her telekinesis and moving, and they're blasting. Like, it's fun, especially because, you can be forgiven of some of the overall cheapness.
Yeah.
Recognizing where they were at the time.
So, should we take another break and then come back with our new final segment?
Let's introduce it and then hope people will come back. So when we come back, when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of trivia, and then after that, because we film out of segments, let's lean into my comic book knowledge. We're going to talk about comic books, but don't go away. I'm going to do it in a way that if you don't read comic books, hopefully it will still be interesting to you. So come back for both of those segments and then decide if you want to go away.
What are you doing here? Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Don't give up on them, Eric.
What would you have me do, Charles? I've heard these arguments before.
It was a long time ago. Mankind has evolved since then.
Yes. Into us.
You're sneaking around in here, Charles. Whatever are you looking for?
I'm looking for hope.
I will bring you hope, old friend. And I ask only one thing in return. Don't get in my way. We are the future, Charles, not them. They no longer matter.
And we're back with a segment that's we've missed the last couple times. We're back with trivia with Alex. So, you ready for this, Alex?
I mean, I'm not. Are you, Matt?
No, I'm definitely not.
All right. Well, hopefully Alex is ready.
I am ready.
All right.
Okay, someone's ready. There we go.
He wrote them in a Google Doc and then forgot his password, so then we had to go.
I know my password. I forgot my email.
Your username. Yeah, I actually saw that on the computer recently. But yeah, I'm sure the second draft was even better than the first.
Okay.
All right. So who's the first question for Quizmaster?
Yeah.
Me.
You.
Perfect. All right. 1-0. Let's go.
What is the name of the actor who plays Rogue's boyfriend?
What is the name of the actor who plays Rogue's boyfriend? I believe his name was John. I don't know.
No. You can steal.
I can tell you the character's name.
Nah, I don't know.
It was Cody is the character. Was also the character in the comic.
I looked at Cass and just said Rogue's boyfriend.
Not that important. You know what? Maybe I'm sure she calls him that. But you know what? You don't even have to give us the answer. No one cares. All right, ask Matt a question.
But I'll tell
He
you.
was right. That was a hard one.
Maybe he went on to do something famous. I don't believe he did.
Sean Roberts.
Nope.
For Matt.
Yeah.
When did X-Men come out? For the one.
2000.
Yep, correct.
Yeah, Matt and I have already discussed that on this very episode. All right.
Next one for you.
Okay.
How long is X-Men the movie?
Like how many minutes?
Or hours?
All right. Just so you know,
Hours, 10 minutes.
This would be funny, and we can do it this time. But this is like when you just pound on your little brother with all the cheat settings on for you. It's actually not fun for either of the people competing. I will say that it is 1 hour and 12 minutes. That's way actually no too long. I'm changing my answer. 97 minutes.
Wrong.
It better not be an hour and 12 minutes.
I'm gonna say it's an hour and 10 minutes.
An hour and 44 minutes.
Oh right, yeah. Sorry.
It's over 2 hours.
I was thinking of. No, an hour and 44 minutes would be less than 2 hours. We both.
An hour and 44 minutes would be
104.
105. 104, yeah. So I was closer, but.
Were you 110?
No.
I guess it's 6.
Yeah.
And I said, what, 90, whatever? Yeah.
Yeah,
But, yeah, it's not closest. It's get it right.
No, it's exact, so get me my question.
I knew it was less than 2 hours.
I actually struggled on this one, researching it by my brain, but then I had to research it on Google. It's for you, Matt. How many X-Men movies are there?
There are counting spin-offs too, so like Deadpool counts.
No, Deadpool doesn't count. Wolverine movies do count.
Then there are 7 regular X-Men movies.
How many Wolverine? He says Wolverine counts as well.
Oh, Wolverine counts? Oh, then there are 10.
I believe you're wrong. There are 11.
It's 13.
Well, 13 with Deadpool, but
Oh yeah, so
there you go.
I searched it on Google.
So there's 3 in the first trilogy.
Right,
4
there's 4 in the second. That's 7. There's 3 Wolverine movies. That's 10.
2 Deadpool. How'd we get to 13 then?
Yeah, there's not.
That would be one of the 3 Wolverines.
If you can search it up on Google, it said 13.
You know what?
No, because they're counting New Mutants, which isn't out yet.
Yes.
That's
it is dubious whether it will ever be right. But you know what? Neither of us were right. So, or wait.
No, I was
say
right
10?
if you don't count Deadpool.
Yeah, and you said 10. All right.
Right.
Point to Matt.
And then
All right. Is this the final for both of us, or what?
I think Dazzling won this one, but
Okay.
I think that because he knows more a lot about X-Men in the comics.
I mean, I have no points so far. So,
What state is Rogue from?
Louisiana. Unless the movie did it differently than the comic books, but I'm pretty sure it didn't.
Is he right?
Am I right?
Is Louisiana and Mississippi?
No. And
They
I'm
are
wrong
different.
about both. You know what? I was thinking about Gambit.
Yeah, I thought you were too. I was going to say Alabama, so I would not have been right.
I
either.
knew they were both within that region.
Yeah.
But yes, it is Mississippi both ways. No. All right. Well, either way. No,
I think I won 2-0.
Yes, and she goes. She plans her big trip from Mississippi through the Canadian Rockies all the way to,
That's right.
I believe, the fictional place of Laughlin City.
Oh, Rockland?
All right. So, Alex, are you a fan of the X-Men?
Yes.
Yes. Movies, comics, which both?
Comics and some movies.
Yeah. So Alex and I have been reading the comic books for several years now, starting with basically the first appearance of the new team, Wolverine and all of them. And we are just now starting to get close to the 90s. We're in 1989. Rob Liefeld is starting to contribute a bit. And Alex is like, what's with that guy's feet?
Yeah. Also, the pouches. He's seeing all the pouches that now appear.
They'll start soon. The costumes aren't quite pouchy, probably because it's 1989 and not 1990. But yeah,
Right. Fair enough.
Exciting times.
The thing I want to show is back here.
All right. Well, as long as you made a big noise by hitting the table with the microphone and all that. Oh yes, we just found that at a garage sale. He's very excited about his Iceman.
Very nice.
Oh, yeah, you gotta hold it up to the camera. So yes,
There you go.
X-Men is intergenerational, and as he says, the comics, yes, the movies only a bit. That's pretty right, but he'll also discover as we start getting deeper into the comics. Also, the comics sometimes, no, not always.
We read a Wolverine comic that was so awesome. So it said he traveled to Toronto
from Ottawa to the Yukon. He pursued his foe, presumably on foot because he was tracking him. That would be like walking from London to Moscow and back. That's a pretty big difference. Rob Liefeld wrote that one, so everybody's excited. Lots of Liefeld discussion. I can't wait.
And it's shorter the walk to Mexico.
Yes, where we stayed in Mexico. All right, so that is the first trivia of X-Men. It sounds like we have 9 to 11 more, depending on what we decide to do here as a podcast.
So even if we can watch Wolverine.
Yeah, you can watch Wolverine movies. You're still not watching Deadpool.
I know. I watched.
But we'll watch Once Upon a Deadpool. Maybe we'll have to get Matt to watch Once Upon a Time Deadpool. I think he might enjoy the interstitials. All right. Good night.
Okay. Bye.
Hey, it's me.
Prove it.
You're a dick.
Okay.
Okay. And we're back, and we're here with our new segment, Expert recommendations. You like that pun? We think it's pretty good.
Yeah, it works better in writing because it'd be like X, but maybe I'll put it on the screen.
Yeah. No, you know what? I think the audience is smart enough to get it. But what we're doing here is Andy's going to recommend a comic book story based on the movie, or perhaps revolving around the movie, or I don't really know how it's going to relate to the movie. Andy's going to reveal it for us, and then I'm going to ask some questions about it for why someone who has not read this story should care about it, or perhaps should read it. So Andy, hit me. What's your comic book story this week?
Yeah, so the basic idea, you watch the movie, and it's like, hey, I wouldn't mind checking out some X-Men comics. I'm going to give you a recommendation. Now, for this is the first X-Men story, so maybe, or first X-Men movie, so maybe it would make sense, the first X-Men story. Few problems there. First off, this movie is nothing like any of the comics. They formed their kind of own team they picked and chose. Secondly, when the X-Men started, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, it kind of sucked. It kind of sucked. The Silver Age X-Men are not interesting, and that's not just conjecture. People weren't interested in them. It got canceled. The X-Men were canceled. Now, back then, sales figures were so slow to reach.
Wait a minute. Wait. Oh, I think I know where you're going with this. I have a prediction on your thing. I'm going to keep it in my mind, but you keep.
I know.
Keep going.
But sales figures took so long to reach that by the time they canceled the series, the numbers came in after, and like, actually, we're starting to develop some interest. So they brought the title back, but just reprinting all the stuff from before, recognizing that nobody was buying it. So maybe they'll like these, because there weren't like comic book shops where you could go buy a back issue. People bought them off in their newsstands, threw them out. And so that went on until it was time to create a new team. So then you think this might be the jumping off point, the brand new X-Men, the giant size X-Men. This is the team with Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Storm, a couple of other characters nobody cares about. There's a problem. The first story of the new X-Men, giant size #1, which would be reprinted many different times, also not that good. It was a different artist and a different writer. They hung around, did that story, and then I believe like 2 more issues before the writer that came in, Chris Claremont, who would then go on to define the X-Men. He basically wrote it for 20 years, both the X-Men and spin-offs like New Mutants, Wolverine, Excalibur, tons of limited series, which actually is an interesting little discussion about when we get into creators and creator rights. Chris Claremont's a good example of why that's complicated, because it's a great idea that we want to give creators credit, especially now that their creations are making billions of dollars. He barely created any X-Men, even though he wrote them for 20 years. Everything that we think of X-Men came from him and his collaborators. So then that's a bad introduction too. So we were kind of looking for an introduction to the X-Men, but the one that doesn't suck. So I have this. It's X-Men Season 1. This came out in 2001. It's an original graphic novel. Not to get too much comic nerdy about what the difference between a graphic novel is, just this. Don't be the person that calls comic books graphic novels because you're embarrassed to say you read comic books. It's just a publishing format, which is to say that it was published like this. Which is, so what the Marvel did at the time, which was 2001, is they put out a bunch of sets called Season 1, which are introductions to the origins of the characters for new readers. You're somebody who kind of wants to read something, but you're intimidated by decades and decades of backstory. Check this out. This is a modern retelling of the beginning of the stories. So what they're doing is they take the X-Men, the original team, and they get together, but it's written in modern sensibilities, which means you don't have, Stan Lee's purple prose. You don't have thought bubbles, because those don't exist in comics anymore. Instead, your thoughts are brought to you by narration. The kids have cell phones, that sort of thing. So it's modern, but it's the original story. It's 136 pages, and you need to have no information about the X-Men going in. That's the very idea of it. This series was written by Dennis Hopeless, who's done a lot of stuff in comics, including some X-Men. A series called Avengers Arena, which I highly recommend. It's basically like Battle Royale or Hunger Games, but with teen superheroes. And the artist is Jamie McKelvey, who's gotten fairly famous in the comic book world. He did Young Avengers, The Wicked and Divine with his writing partner, Kieran Gillen. He also designed the modern costume of Captain Marvel and Ms. Marvel. So very good artist, and his contributions to this are a big strength. He's really good at drawing young characters and drawing like expressiveness, and as the reason why he did costume design, He actually has a very good sense of fashion, which is important because these characters, unlike in the Silver Age, actually look like the way teenagers dressed, like in 2001. Whereas back in the 60s, Jack Kirby did not draw them like teenagers. They were wearing full suits and bow ties and stuff. But yeah.
Wait, really? They're wearing full suits and bow ties?
That's how the teens dress, don't you know? And they go to the local shop and listen to Bernard the poet doing his beat poetry. That's what it was. Now, obviously, some of that is 60s, but some of that is also, I wouldn't even say old men. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were young when they were doing this. They just, were nerds and didn't really understand how the kids these days work. I guess they weren't. They were probably a little older then because Kirby was like World War II veteran, and this is the 60s, right?
Okay.
I digress.
Anyway,
So why would you pick this up?
Yes.
It's a great introduction to the characters. Mostly, it is fun. It is a great read. It takes about an hour. And the best thing that this series does, besides showing great, teenage hijinks and all the fact that they, develop crushes on one another and all that, which I love that stuff, is it reclaims Jean Grey. Jean Grey is the point of view character for the story, and that is a big deal because basically her role in the original team back when they were writing in the 60s was girl.
Yep.
And this is not uncommon. That was Wonder Woman's role when they let her be in the Justice League. At one point, they actually kicked her out, and she had to be like the receptionist for the team. I kid you not.
Yep.
That was Invisible Girl's role with the Fantastic Four. That was Wasp's role with the Avengers. And it's just, so their powers were underdeveloped, and they were constantly getting rescued by their male teammates. That's what she was. That is not what she is here. She is smart, perceptive. She is skeptical of the entire process, much like Wolverine in this movie. And it's kind of shows her journey of getting used to this idea that she is attending this school because she is the 5th member of the team. She joins. So we get to see the world that they're in, and we get to see her develop. And it's just this is kind of one of the great portrayals of Jean Grey, to the point where this series, which is out of continuity, would start to affect the way that future writers would start to create Jean Grey.
I was going to say, because don't they actually bring back the original X-Men team at I was going to say a couple of years ago, but by now it's probably more than a couple of years
several
ago.
years ago. I haven't read for sure because it's a different writer, but I have no doubt that part of the motivation was for that. It's because this series was so well, this issue was so well received. It's not a series; it's 136 pages.
Yeah, so let me ask you a couple questions about it. So, so it features the original X-Men team, right?
Mm-hmm.
The original 5, like Jean Grey, Cyclops, Beast, Iceman, and Angel, right?
Yeah, along with Professor X, correct.
Right, along with Professor X. And is it the plot of like the first X-Men stories?
So it's kind of at the margins of the first 4 stories of the X-Men.
Okay.
So we get some of the scenes from those, but told from a modern perspective and often through Jean Grey's perspective. And then it's kind of like the stuff that was happening in between. The kids hanging out at the mansion, training to learn their powers, falling in love with each other. A fun, triangles of Angel and Jean and Scott and Jean and Beast leaving the team and Iceman being heartbroken because his buddy left.
Right.
So it's prior to. Continue.
No, okay. No, so I was going to say, so it's more like a story told at the time of the original stories, but with modern voices.
Yeah.
But without retelling the original story.
Right, yeah. It's not just like a complete straight up remake. And then with the idea, well, that happened then, now. Well, this is how comic books work, is that, characters from the 60s are perpetually in their late 20s. So you're just using that shifting is like, as if that those stories happened, but we're saying that they happened in the 2000s. That's what this series is doing. So that's why I would choose it for somebody that wants to just check something out. This, I feel like, is the easiest and most fun introduction to the X-Men. If you were like, watching this movie and it's like, hey, that seems like a fun world, the magical school of, superpowered folks, check this one out. You will, and you won't have to read the impenetrable, prose of the older days. And the 60s is the toughest, but even Claremont through the 80s and 90s, that dude loved to fill a page with words.
Yes.
Modern comic writing isn't like that for the most part, especially, superhero ones. Maybe a few indie ones, the writer really loves his own voice so much. They recognize now that the artist can do so much. And Jamie McKelvey can do so much. It is so like understandable just with the looks that he uses, what's going on, and all of the angst and the fun that they're having. So yeah, you read this and you'll get a sense of how fun these ideas can be. You read this and be like, that would be a great movie. If Marvel's looking for a way to reintroduce the team, they've never done this. Now, I don't know how they start a franchise with just these 5 characters. I don't know how you start the franchise with Wolverine. I'd like to see them try. I'd like to see them hold Wolverine back from the franchise a bit, in part because I think they need to get away from Jackman, because the comparisons would just be so hard. But I don't know how you start a team with 4 dudes and 1 girl in 2023 or whenever these movies start coming out.
Yeah.
It's also tough with 5 white kids, but there's no reason why these characters have to be white. I'd say Angel probably should be, because part of his character in this story and in all is confronting his privilege of being a rich white boy. But otherwise, none of it is there. The fundamental story of X-Men stories, which we see here, is ostracized for being different. So, hey, it would be nice that story was being told by non-white characters. But yeah, this is my intro. If you want to kind of get into an X-Men comic, check this out. If you're a modern reader of comic books, even if you don't read a lot, it reads really easy and really fun. I'd say the biggest flaw of it is it's too damn short. I want more, and this is it. The hopeless
that's all you got.
Writes any more X-Men stories, but if you read this, they're like, oh man, that was great. Then you want to move into the all new, all different X-Men when they bring this team into the present of comic books. And I actually, after being lapsed from reading X-Men comics, actually just did that. The idea got interested in me. I checked it out, and while so much was going on in the X-Men that I didn't know, you catch up. It's tough to find though. That's the one flaw. This, because it was printed in 2001, I believe it's out of print. So if you walk into a comic book store, you might not be able to find it. I think it was printed with the idea to be in bookstores, so you might still find it in bookstores. It is on Comixology, so you can just read it digitally that way, or through the Marvel Unlimited app, or you can do like I did, go to a library and pick it up. Great way.
Libraries are great.
So, what do you think? Does this sound interesting to you?
No, it does actually. I think I will look that up, because as someone who has not read a lot of X-Men comic books but has always been interested in them, that actually does sound like a really good launching point. So
yeah, because that is the big challenge of X-Men comics, is finding somewhere to jump off, because the mythology
there's a lot there.
X-Men is impenetrable. Now, I am a scholar of many years. I basically have every X-Men story from when the new team was introduced. So that's like the 70s.
Like 75, I think, was Giant Size.
All the way through to 2001. And basically every X-Men comic, other than like some side. Yeah, I know. It's amazing.
I was going to say, there was a lot of spin-offs in there, too.
Some spin-offs I don't have. I'm starting to fill those gaps in because I'm reading them to my son. Because we're even reading, it's not just the mainline stuff. We've gone on to side quests and all of this. It's kind of like an ambition of my life. One day I'm going to read them all. But it was prohibitively expensive, but I didn't let that stop me. I tried. And now with digital apps, I can just find stuff. And I'm doing it. It's led me to a few choices where it's like, oh, I probably shouldn't have read that to a 9-year-old. But hey, that's where we're at.
Oh, well.
So I recognize that this X-Men Season 1 is not that at all. And hopefully future introductions that I will recommend in this series will also be somewhere where you can kind of jump in.
Okay. That sounds pretty good to me. So, okay. So I think we're kind of at the end here. We'll be coming back, I guess, in a couple weeks with X2, X-Men United, which I think is the formal title for that. As always, Andy, anything else to add, or are we good?
No, that sounds right. Yeah, as always, you can subscribe to the podcast via, YouTube, the various podcatchers out there. The title of the podcast, as Matt said at the beginning, is the Infinity Stone Podcast, which has nothing to do with X-Men. Not at all. You can follow us on Twitter at pod_infinity. And next week, we'll more X-Men, possibly.
Well, not next week, but,
next
couple weeks.
Time. And,
next time.
We don't know when people are watching this. Next time, possibly the best movie in the entire X-Men franchise.
Universe. Yes, I think that's very possible. So, let's hit it.
joke?
I do want to hear a joke.
Do you know what happens when a toad gets struck by lightning?
No, what happens?
It croaks.
See, Joss Whedon, Halle Berry. This is how it's supposed to be done.
Yep, that's a better joke. That is a better joke.
Good job, bud.